They had to have some way of preheating that metal to soften it to where then either, and it won't be dynamite. Dynamite would be like firecrackers on that building, okay? It'd be something like massive amounts of C4, or it would be something like RDA, which is far more powerful than C4. Both of those are basically military grade weapons. They have found videos that we didn't have time to look at, and they have proven all three of those towers controlled demolition. But I knew that on September 1st when I saw molten metal coming out. I know the only way that you can turn steel to molten is thermitic reaction. The question is, which version of thermitic reaction did they use? There were two nations on this planet that were wanting and doing their denomination of cells of oil in euro and not dollar. One was Iraq, look what happened to them, and the other one was Chavez in Venezuela.
Watch Federal Post. Bold and independent.
Hello, good evening. This is Hassan Zafar with Talking Politics. Karl Schwarz, you have met Karl before in the two interviews we had in the previous month. And quite revealing, I must say. And today, Karl has a lot to share with us again. He is going to start by responding to Richard Gates' interview, which I conducted 2 weeks ago. And here we are, Karl. We have interesting things to talk about. One is, what is the real problem with Venezuela? Then CPEC, and it dates back to 1971, the whole thing, as you were telling me before we started recording. Yeah. Now, the question is, everything is related to oil and gas resources. And this whole thing, which erupted in 9/11, it is going back and forth in history. So what else would you like to share with us today?
Well, to start off, I sent Richard Gage a friendly email. It's a standard we're working on. We don't want to have an expert witness get destroyed by a defense attorney. Details matter, issues matter. It's like on the, you made the comment about the Sky Warrior, but it was in context with the World Trade Center. And I had already proven between 2001 and 2005 that what hit the Pentagon was a bunker buster missile and an A-3 Sky Warrior. Now, I haven't shown all the photographs we have. The most revealing one is the Sky Warrior canopy window, but we also have a piece of the wing, and Dan Hanley will know what this is. Jets have air brakes and they have flaps. And this one photo we have, you can actually zoom it in and you can see the part number. That is a actuator for the air brakes on an A3 Sky Warrior. And it's never been installed on a 757. And what's always amazed me, I even knew that this Hani Hanjour was a complete joke as a pilot. I don't even know if he could drive a car that well. But I just missed that whole thing on September 12th when I was sent the canopy window from the Pentagon, from a lieutenant colonel from her home. So I woke up the next morning, will you please identify what this is? This is not from any vehicle on the Pentagon, and it's not from any 757 ever built. So we actually started September the 12th. I was already angry about what happened the previous day, but I went after September 12th. Like with Richard Gage, he was talking about certain things. The outside of those World Trade Centers, they had no structural columns. They had no structural beams. The horizontal strip he was talking about was a steel plate, and it arrived from the shop already prefabricated, basically 3 stories tall, and it was staggered. So the welds and everything, where they welded them together would, increase the strength. But the top of those bar joists were actually welded and bolted, and the bottom of the weld, what happens on the bottom of a truss, a floor truss like that is it sloped inward. And they had this device that was connected to the outside wall and it was bolted, but it was like a damper because of the wind. They had to factor in a lot of wind loads on those four walls. It didn't matter which direction it's coming from. And they had two lengths of bar joists. You know, that interior core was rectangular, but everything in that core, he did mention 156 by 22 inches, basically what they call a tube column. But the walls on that tube column were too thick for any bomb to penetrate. There's not an explosive made that would take one of those columns out. Even if they used RDX, which is very powerful explosive, that's what detonates a thermonuclear weapon. That wasn't enough to pierce that type of steel. So what they had to do, and this is where I think AE 911 Truth and I are in agreement, they had to have some way of preheating that metal to soften it to where then either, and it won't be dynamite. Dynamite would be like firecrackers on that building, okay? It'd be something like massive amounts of C4, or it would be something like RDX, which is far more powerful than C4. And both of those are basically military grade weapons. The issue on let me back up and explain something. When I moved to Europe, I blew off all of the 9/11 people demanding that I assign my scientists to investigate. Nanoparticles were found. Nanothermite was found. It wasn't nanothermite. Now let me explain why. Thermite is a very simple composition of powdered iron oxide and aluminum powder. Now, when you mix those two together, as Richard demonstrated on his video, when you ignite that, it's almost instantaneous. You know, it turns to several thousand degrees. And he had that little pan there, whoever did that test. And yes, you have the little iron nodules or spheres laying in the bottom of the pan. You can see that with your eyes. What you can't see is nanoscale iron oxide and aluminum oxide. And since the origin was that, you know, those are the two elements you're dealing with. Looking for those nanoparticles is a waste of time. They're going to be there anyway. Now, back in the past, one of his videos, he was talking about carbon nanotubes were found in the dust. I sent him a polite email and I said, diesel engines make low purity carbon nanotubes, and they also make low purity buckyballs. You know, that's not evidence either. So he didn't bring that up.
Because what he was explaining in his video, in his presentation, that you need the heat of about 1600 Celsius and above, maybe 3000 degrees Celsius to melt that kind of column, which is achieved by any ordinary material that could be produced in a cave in Afghanistan, for example.
That's true. That is absolutely true. And they can barely produce it in a U.S. government lab.
Yes.
The other issue, he's absolutely correct when he was talking about a lot of the steel members that were inspected had a lot of sulfidation to the metal itself. Now, that did not come from the iron oxide aluminum. There's no sulfur in the thermite, okay? Now, when you get over into thermate, which is a U.S. government patent, as of 2001, the only thing that had ever been used for is what they call incendiary grenades. That's basically when you pull the pin, you throw the grenade. When the bomb goes off, then it'll mix the ingredients of the iron oxide and the aluminum, and you've got an incendiary. It's a pyrotechnic, okay?
Yeah.
And it's intended to burn very hot, and it burns very quick. But the sulfidation issue actually comes from thermate. There's a fast way and a slow way to do thermitic reactions. And that is iron oxide plus aluminum plus sulfur. Now, the more sulfur you put in there, it lowers the temperature a little bit, but it actually burns longer. And that's why we didn't focus on Lawrence Livermore. We focused on where those it's basically it's a plate. You can put it up next to the column. It's not going to do anything until you ignite it. But due to the thickness of the plate, it could burn for all day.
Until you extinguish it professionally.
Well, you can't even extinguish that. I mean, I'm not aware of. It's kind of like when a lithium ion battery catches on fire. If you spray water on it, it just gets worse.
Yes.
And thermitic reactions are the same. Now, we use thermitic reactions in nanotechnology mostly for purification of metals. And sometimes to reach the purity levels to be what we're at in nanotechnology, you may have to do that 5 or 10 times.
Yes.
It depends on what your source is. But
this alone raises a number of questions, Karl. How did this kind of material go into that building? Where was the security? Who allowed it to go there? How was it transported there? And the timeline for all this kind of arrangement. Who was in yes.
The assassins of World Trade Center were the security company. They had full access. Otis Elevators, the contract was taken away from them. And that's a major contract. I mean, there are a lot of elevators on those Twin Towers. And also over in the World Trade Center 7. But they took the contract away from them and gave it to Ace Elevators. They came in, they did the deal, they wired that building for controlled demolition, and then just a couple of months later, they filed bankruptcy and they no longer exist.
Right. So what are we establishing here? One thing, the ordinary Boeing hitting the World Trade Center could not demolish it. One thing is very, very clear.
No, I think you could have hit. I think you could have hit either tower with 4 or 5 jets and created fires, and those buildings would still be standing had there not been a plan to destroy them anyway.
Exactly. So this is very well established. But the mystery remains, for me at least, what was the necessity to demolish Building 7, which was a football ground field away from the Twin Towers? What was the necessity to demolish that building?
Larry Silverstein owned that building, and then he signed a lease for 99 years with the Port Authority on the rest of the World Trade Center. If they hadn't destroyed his building, they wouldn't have gotten enough insurance on his double terrorist attack claim to rebuild what he rebuilt.
Okay.
Now, I'll tell you. I'll tell you this: there were 2 miracle survivors on those 10 floors. The only 10 floors of the entire World Trade Center that had been renovated for asbestos, what you call asbestos abatement, asbestos remediation, were the 10 office floors in the North Tower. In the lawsuit that they were seeking from 1991, and they lost it May 17, 2001, in U.S. District Court, New Jersey, they were seeking $6 billion. About $4.5 billion of that was strictly for the World Trade Center, and the rest was for the 3 airports, LaGuardia, Kennedy, and Newark. And then all of a sudden, everything works out as Larry claims a double terrorist attack, and he winds up with about $4.5 billion, which was what the Port Authority was seeking anyway. Now, one of the things that I admire about, I wish Richard Gay's team had started a lot earlier. They have found videos that we didn't have time to look at, and they have proven all 3 of those towers, yes, controlled demolition. But I knew that on September 1st when I saw molten metal coming out. I know the only way that you can turn steel to molten is thermitic reaction. The question is, which version of thermitic reaction did they use? Now, there's a company in Germany. They did a fast way, and they've been doing it for about 130 or 40 years. They purify metals, but they also have a slow way, and it's literally a plate, and it kind of looks like a laptop. And once you ignite that thing, it's going to burn and burn. What I think they did was they ignited those. Maybe one or two of them was a quality control issue. They burned too fast. But that whole building wouldn't have collapsed that way because all it was doing was heating up the outside of that steel beam or steel column. And then it's flowing out of the towers. It would be very easy to put a temperature sensor in there and do the science, do the math, that if you put that heat sustained for X amount of time, then you detonate the bombs and bring it down. One of the things I always wonder about, I mean, those two towers came down almost like chopping up spaghetti.
And then they turn into powder. The entire concrete turns into powder.
Well,
does that happen?
Well, let me describe the concrete. I don't know if any of the 9/11 truths had to do what I had to do in architecture school. Okay, I had a professor. He would almost drool. He was so excited about how the World Trade Center was designed. All the loads of that building were carried in the center core. The four walls were nothing but those steel tubes. You had the aluminum attached to the outside. It was originally supposed to be stainless steel. You had the 110 PSI or KSI steel above the windows, because even with the floor load on it, you still could not afford any type of deflection, or you would mess up or break the window, which you didn't want to do, 110 stories up. But the whole thing was carried from the top, suspended. I mean, those rectangular steel tubes were more like cables on a bridge, on a suspension bridge. And that was all transferred back to the center. But even the concrete, we had to calculate all these loads and redo the entire calculation of World Trade Center. The concrete they use was 60% as dense as normal concrete. I mean, if you're doing like a 10, 20, 30-story building, you use the regular concrete, you would factor that into the beams, factor it into the columns. But in World Trade Center, what they had there was so fine that as soon as you turned on the food blender, there was no aggregate there to hold it together. It would just literally turn into a big dust cloud.
Yes.
There was nothing there.
That's a very astonishing part, really. How does concrete turn into a dust cloud? Yes.
Yeah, those dust clouds were nothing more than the concrete that they used, which was 60% as dense, had no aggregate in it. As long as it was in the pan, on top of the bar joist, you had a corrugated pan. And as long as that was inside of the pan, it was solid. But as soon as they turned on the food blender, bringing those buildings down, yes, huge dust storm. There was nothing to hold it together.
Yeah.
It was almost like putting talcum powder in there really dense, and you tamp it down as hard as you can. You wet it to make sure it's all solid, and then you come in and you put carpet over it. And that's basically what they use. And they had to lower the weight. Now let me go back to what we were talking about just before we started recording. I did not know this until Monday. I've got people that have been watching the UK column. They've been doing some deep research for me. I mean, they already knew about the 3 videos with UK column. They already knew I was in Loose Change 1 and 2. But in Final Cut, I wasn't in Final Cut because Alex Jones was the executive producer, okay? But there was one revelation in there that I had never heard. I knew everything else was in that Final Cut, except this. In 1971, I'm in architecture school. That's the same time that I'm doing the calculations on World Trade Center structural system. The construction came to a complete halt. It took them like 3 or 4 months to run the numbers to figure out what they were going to do. What happened in 1969, there was a new U.S. law came into play called the National Environmental Protection Act. It banned asbestos as a fire retardant on ships, anything else. It was not only an EPA issue, it was an OSHA issue. It was a bigger issue across, the environment, workplace, everything. They came to the conclusion, let me back up. The World Trade Center 1 had already been topped out. The steel had been topped out. There was a roof on the building. On the photograph, I saw like maybe 70% complete on putting the vertical aluminum, those vertical elements in there, the aluminum. And then World Trade Center 2 looked like it was maybe 60% as far as the steel. And they had just barely come up, maybe 25 or 30% with putting the aluminum vertical elements on. They came to the conclusion in 1971 that it would cost them $1 billion to fix the asbestos right then. And they just went ahead and just kept building those twin towers. And then they waited until 1987 to sue Allied Corporation over the asbestos. What I've been waiting on since 9/11, which is 24 and a half years, I haven't heard one person in the U.S. government admit the asbestos, and I haven't heard one person in the U.S. government admit what the objective was in the Caspian. They have totally avoided those facts, and those are prosecutable facts in court. But I didn't know it on Monday when I took 3 hours, basically about 2.5 hours to watch that video in 3 pieces during the day, off and on, most early in the morning and at night. And 1971, they already knew about the asbestos problem, and it was because of a U.S. law change. Now, by the time you get up to 1985, 86, you had huge judgments being handed down against asbestos, but also what they call silicosis or white lung, people who work in glass factories and work in the mines where they're getting the pure silica. And also coal miners and people who work in the industries that what they call black lung, which is carbon. Right? Too much of that, your health is ruined, and you're going to die at an early age. But it really disturbed me. That's what I was saying. Just before we recorded, we have another timeline in the chronology that goes back to 1971.
That's very interesting. Yes. So
I don't disagree with Richard. I don't disagree with what Richard's group has done, but I even told him in an email, I wish you had started earlier.
Yeah.
Because most of this was nailed down by the time he formed Architect Engineers. We had enough facts to take these people on, but the chronology and the facts just keep getting deeper. And when this goes to court,
where does it?
The defense is going to be trying to make sure they don't get nailed. So all the facts have to be in place.
Where does it link all of it? What is the epicenter of all of this 9/11 thing?
That's what I sent you today. I was blocked from finding
the article with me. I have that article.
I was blocked for many years on searching to find an article I'm mentioned in. Okay. Yeah. I'm mentioned two times in the first page. As of 1994, and this is the new timeline feature, I wasn't going to say anything about it until I had the document in my hand to prove it. Okay. But there's another timeline chronology issue to insert. 1994, I knew about a certain bond issue that was done in 1991. There was actually two, but only one of them traced to Cantor Fitzgerald. It was 120 billion. It was based on what are called Brady bonds, which is Nicholas Brady, who was Secretary of the Treasury under George Herbert Walker Bush. In 1991, they did a 10-year bond deal, $120 billion, and they used as additional collateral, since the Brady bonds were only a 50% guarantee by Uncle Sam. And what they used were fake and bogus gold collateral certificates that did not belong to them. Now, in that, and the title of this investigation, this was a group of investigative reporters who was going over all of this, and they titled their summation "Collateral Damage."
Yeah. This attachment which you sent me, the document I cannot. Yes.
Feet to the fire.
This article that you shared with me, there you mentioned this collateral damage is a document I cannot search for due to search blocking and shadow banning directed at me. One of the UK people that saw all three of my videos has been finding a lot of things I did in the past that I'm not allowed to find. That's what happened. And the money that you are talking about, you checked in those banks personally. It was there, and then it turned to amount zero later on.
When I moved to Europe, I went to 5 banks that Leo Wanta had told me the name of the bank officer, some of them were still there, the account number, and other authorization codes. I showed all that to them. They verified it was legitimate. But while he was in prison, because that's where the George Herbert Walker Bush clan wanted him, they cleaned all those accounts out. Money just disappeared.
And no idea where it all went?
No, don't know where it went. But the fact that they had a 120 billion bond deal that was due in September 2001, and Cantor Fitzgerald was, I don't know if they were the underwriter, the issuer, or maybe they were just the book manager. You know, they were the ones who were going to handle settlement. Bingo, they get hit on 9/11.
And how is this money linked to what happens on 9/11? This episode, you link
if you read the subtitle of collateral damage,
yes,
it's U.S. black operations in September 11th.
Black operation on September.
Yeah, black operations.
Okay. So there was something bigger going on, and what happened on 9/11, it was only to cover it up.
It's either cover it up or not even pay it off.
Okay. So that's $120 billion is the key figure there.
Well, there was actually two 120.
So, sorry, I lost you.
Identical.
I lost you.
Evidence of Cantor Fitzgerald.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. There were actually two. There were two $120 billion bond issues, one out of Israel and one was U.S. I never found anything that tied the second $120 billion bond issue back to Cantor Fitzgerald or anybody in the U.S. That was for something else. What, I don't know.
What is the Venezuela connection there?
Okay, let's deal with Venezuela real quick.
Yeah.
Because you and I touched on it in part 2, but you changed the subject and we went away from it.
No, I don't want to change the subject. You can carry on with what you are saying. No.
Okay, now, the fifth president of the United States was James Monroe. It's what they call the Monroe Doctrine.
Okay.
In 1823, he kind of co-conspired with Great Britain, and he drafted what is called the Monroe Doctrine.
Monroe Doctrine.
And it had several basic provisions. It assured the monarchs in Europe that the United States was not going to intervene in their issues. They could have all the wars they wanted. It also basically warned them that there would be no more colonization in the Western Hemisphere. And that was basically, it was basically called Monroe's Bluff. We didn't have the Navy to do anything about it. But there was a warning to the colonization empires, which was Holland, Belgium, France, Spain, and Portugal. And they conveniently left out Great Britain because Great Britain was always big in empire building and colonization. And it stuck. Those monarchies did not come into the Western Hemisphere. Now, what I always wondered, and I also got this news in watching the Caspian Basin in Russia, okay? This was back after George Bush and Tony Blair had absolutely lost over in the Caspian Basin. There was no way they were going to win. All of a sudden, I get a press release one day translated for me, and it informs that Lukoil, which is Russia, has sold its 35% interest in the Orinoco Basin to Rosneft, which is Russia.
Okay.
So when I dug deeper, Russia controlled 70% of the largest pool of oil known on this planet. That happened under Chavez, not Maduro. Okay.
So what you're telling me is that Russia controlled 70% of the oil on this planet.
Of the Orinoco Basin.
Okay.
Now I even mentioned this at Jimmy Walter's events 2004. There were two nations on this planet that were wanting and doing their denomination of sales of oil in euro and not dollar. One was Iraq. Look what happened to them. And the other one was Chavez in Venezuela.
Yes.
Now, Chavez had changed his tone towards the U.S. because they kept trying to regime change him. He was not a communist. He was a socialist, but he was kind of like Gaddafi. He was doing some good things for his people. And out of the blue, George Herbert Walker Bush approves the sale of significant parts of Unocal to PDVSA, which is the state-owned Venezuela oil industry, to Venezuela. So Unocal has money to go over there and harass Verdas Corporation with the Delta oil people. They were going to go get that pipeline that Bush wanted. But when I saw the translation, that Russia, out of the blue, all of a sudden controls 70%, not 35%. And then later, when Maduro got into power, the United States turned up the sanctions. And I saw another report that Russia had provided another $5+ billion, and they now control 80%. And see, that's a violation of the Monroe Doctrine. That's a foreign power setting up shop in the Western Hemisphere. Plus, Chavez even allows Russia Navy access to their ports.
Yes.
So that's what's wrong with Venezuela. It's not that they're an enemy of the United States. It's that the United States thinks that the 1823 Monroe Doctrine still applies.
Iraq was close to Russia. Venezuela was close to Russia, and that was the real problem there.
Yeah. Plus the fact that Chavez allowed the U.S. Navy, Russian Navy, direct access to their ports. So you got the Russian Navy. They're not allowed and permitted by the U.S., but they're allowed and permitted by Venezuela.
Okay. And Pakistan made a similar mistake by allowing the Chinese to connect with Gwadar.
Yeah.
Fell out of favor.
But I wouldn't call that a mistake. I would call that a smart decision.
Okay.
Now, over time, I requested from you the other day that you send me the timeline of the CPEC.
Yes, I call it a mistake from the US perspective. Because right after that event, Pakistan falls out of favor entirely, and
Exactly.
the Indians become the US darlings after that.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. But what I suspected in the timeline that you sent me, which I figured was available in Pakistan, not available in the West, those negotiations with China started in 2001. So while you've got Bush and Blair sitting over here drooling about, this big oil deal they're going to take over, China and Pakistan were already planning to sign that CPEC agreement, and they did in 2002. And by 2006, the port construction was completed. They started in 2002, and they completed. And I had people in the Pentagon tell me, they were about to decide that George W. Bush was as crazy as his father. Daddy wanted to invade the USSR for the oil and gas. And then Junior goes over here to the Pentagon and demands they come up with a war planning team to take Baluchistan, part of Baluchistan province, Pakistan, and Gwadar back so he can have it. I mean, that to me is just U.S. hubris, arrogance on top of stupidity.
Let's not forget, it's the same year, 2001, when Pakistan signs this Gwadar deal with China, and the Balochistan emerges as a problem, and we have BLA, Balochistan Liberation Army, that's backed by the Indians. It becomes active there. All these activities start in Balochistan from that time.
Well,
one more thing I'm aware of, maybe that helps our conversation and further investigation. It was the same year when the British and American universities started to dispense generous scholarships to the Balochi students at that time. So maybe that's also an important thing that started in 2001, and now it's been 25 years. Yes. So please go ahead. How do you see this?
No, but when you look at the dynamics, I mean, even after they knew they had lost Gwadar and they couldn't come up with find a way to break up, that's when Obama came into power. He immediately starts drawing heavily on Pakistan. And what most Americans and me took exception to is they would hit a wedding or a funeral and kill 50 or 60 people just to take out one alleged terrorist.
Yes.
I mean, there's no excuse for that. You're not going to build any goodwill with a nation doing stuff like that. But Obama didn't care. I mean, what he was doing is anti-Pakistan, anti-Venezuela, and he was really ramping up anti-Russia. But when I started looking at all the dynamics, that link that I put in that email I sent to you today, you have to know the name of that article to even find it. And the title of it is The Dreams and Schemes of Zionists and Neocons. And what I'm mentioning in there is a name, William F. Browder. They couldn't get in to any place without running into obstacles. Now, Browder was a U.S. citizen. His grandfather, he renounced his citizenship for UK. His grandfather was the president of the Communist Party of USA, and he even ran for president. And then all of a sudden, Browder renounces, relocates to London, and he's trying to move into Russia, directed with big money at their banks and their energy market. And they got caught. He and his sidekick, Sergei Magnitsky. And Magnitsky, he was arrested, prosecuted. He died. Next thing you know, in 2012, Obama and the Congress pushed through the Magnitsky Act. and they started sanctioning Russians. And then right after that, they started forcing EU members of NATO to also sanction Russians. So this anti-Russia stuff started basically in Venezuela, and then it got ramped up in 2012 forward, well before Kiev Maidan. And then look where we are in Ukraine right now. I mean, Ukraine is a complete flop. And Russia's doing just fine. And when I hear Trump talking about tariffs and more sanctions, I mean, that's like, why don't you get a hammer out and hit yourself in the head? U.S. sanctions against Russia have done no harm to Russia, and they have crushed the U.S. economy and double crushed, because of energy prices, the EU economy.
Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, I have to keep up with a lot of stuff because of what we do. Right now in Germany, Volkswagen has closed 3 plants. They've cut back a Porsche plant at Leipzig. Their entire e-mobility, what you call e-mobility, the EV cars. These are the people who make the engines, the drivetrains, the transmissions. That entire industry in Germany right now is bankrupt. It's insolvent. It's all melting to the ground. And a lot of people don't realize Volkswagen Group is controlled by 3 people. They're Austrians, and they're all related. It's the Porsche and Peace family that control 53.6% of Volkswagen Group, which is a lot more than just Volkswagen. It's Bentley, Lamborghini, Audi, Skoda, right here in the Czech Republic, MAN Trucks, MAN Transportation Systems. And I saw an article last week that they have what's called MAN Energy Solutions. They're trying to liquidate that because they don't see a need for it going forward. But that's a company, number 2 automaker in the world, is basically getting ready to tell Germany to just go to hell. And it was also announced recently, the 3 plants that they closed in Germany, China wants to buy them and make EV cars over here. And that's got the EU sweating bullets because they know they can't compete with China.
Now the Chinese have stopped the export of rare earth, which is crucial for some electronic components of these cars.
Exactly.
Yes. So that's where. So what was the original sin here? Just trying to link it back to where we started. What was the original sin that has culminated into what we see today?
I think all the way back to the George Herbert Walker Bush administration and what their covert operations were, what they intended to take over. They were looking for an excuse for a Pearl Harbor, and what the article says, collateral damage. World Trade Center was collateral damage. They didn't care how many people they killed because they were going to kill a couple million more. I think that's the original sin right there.
Right. And where does Israel stand in all of it?
Say that again. Say it.
Where does Israel figure in all of it, in this entire picture?
I think that Israel had a hand in 9/11, but it was mainly as a cover story. I think Saudi GDI and Mossad both knew 9/11 was coming, and they were both assisting in any way possible to let it happen. If you know that George Bush came into office to destroy 7 nations in 5 years, that was until he ran into the Taliban and the Iraqi insurgency. And all 7 of those nations just happen to be Israel's enemies. That would have made Israel a big beneficiary to have such a change in war policy. To go after and crush Israel's enemies. And it's part of what they call the Greater Israel, project. And everything between the Nile and the Euphrates. I'm not aware of any part of the Bible that ever says that used to be Israel. I mean, Israel everywhere I've seen was basically from about Tarsus. There are a lot of Jews in Turkey back then. In fact, Saul of Tarsus, who became the Apostle Paul, they were basically along the Mediterranean Sea coast. You know, from about southern Turkey to Gaza.
When Pakistan decided to be part of the war on terror as the frontline state of the United States, what do you think people at the helm of affairs in this country knew about 9/11?
You mean in Pakistan?
Yes, in Pakistan. Did they have any
Okay.
idea what was actually going on, or they were just dragged into a situation they were not really fully aware of?
I think it was involved in a situation they weren't fully aware of, and that pretty well sums up Americans too. You know, one of the things you'll read in that email I sent today about collateral damage. Even V.K. Durham, who had the gold certificates in her name, CIA killed her husband. He refused to sign a fake document assigning those gold certificates over to them. VK used to work for the Treasury Department. She was a Trojan horse detector investigator. So was Eustace Mullins. I knew them both well, especially from about 2002 until both of them passed. And the average American really doesn't know exactly what happened. I don't think people in Pakistan know. I'm learning.
They never came to know at any stage. President Musharraf, his cabinet members, any one of them had no idea until 2008, till his government came to an end. They had no idea whatsoever. Yes.
About the only thing they knew up front early was this 100,000 that was wired from ISI, Pakistan ISI, to Muhammad Atta. But it wasn't even a year later that it comes out that Muhammad Atta is actually Egyptian intelligence. He's a go-between between the CIA and Mossad. Occasionally, he's a go-between between Egyptian intelligence, CIA, and Saudi GDI. It depends on how covert they want to keep it. And the other thing that popped out at me, and this is also in my book, by the way, not too long after the United States commenced the attack on Afghanistan, Donald Rumsfeld flies into Turkmenistan and by armed convoy goes into the northern part of Afghanistan for a meeting with General Rashid Dostum and Mohammed Atta. Now, I thought that was really weird, and I saw the photo that they showed. I said, well, that's not Mohammed Atta. So I backed up and dug a little deeper. The name Atta is mostly Turkmen and Afghan. And it would be extremely rare to have an Egyptian with the last name Atta.
Okay.
So, you know, that's when I really started questioning, who is this guy?
So who was that guy? Who was that guy?
Yeah, I mean, Donald, there's an article, and I actually copied that part of it and put it as a footnote in my book. You know, why is Donald Rumsfeld meeting with Mohammed Atta? And you can tell from the photo, this is not the same guy that they allege is the ringleader. And I've loved Dan Hanley's assessment of this. You know, Hani Hanjour, he couldn't taxi a Cessna 172 around the Pentagon, much less do what he supposedly did like a Top Gun pilot. And you go back and you look at the 9/11 Commission report, one guy from Israel certifies he was a Top Gun pilot.
So he was an Israeli guy.
Yeah, the guy that certified him to the 9/11 Commission used to work for the IDF, yes.
Right. Now, this man, Donald Rumsfeld, meets in the north of Afghanistan. One is Rashid Dostum, and the other one is this guy, the Israeli guy, who was dubbed as someone else.
Yeah, well, no, he was meeting General Rashid Dostum and, quote, Muhammad Atta. But there was a photograph of who he was meeting with, and I could tell that was Dostum. The other guy, Muhammad Atta, I'd never seen this face before, but it definitely wasn't the ringleader of 9/11.
So what does it mean in the whole story?
A huge cover-up, as many diversions as they could possibly create so they don't get caught in their crime. I mean, I've been convinced, really convinced since about 2003, this was the biggest crimes the United States has ever perpetrated on U.S. citizens, on U.S. territory. That's been my focus since about 2003. And I haven't seen anything to dissuade me on that. I mean, nothing. The more that comes up, the more that gets confirmed, it's all saying the same thing. This was a U.S. job, collateral damage against U.S. citizens so they could go wage this war and basically blow $7, $8, maybe $9 trillion and have nothing to show for it, except a lot of dead people.
It's sad because people in all these countries that got involved into this thing, the whole generation, my generation, your generation, even younger people, they have grown up thinking of something or maybe believing in something that was a total lie.
Yes. I mean, my son was born in 1980 and he joined the Arkansas National Guard. He got called up and attached to 1st Cavalry Division. That was the second wave that went into Iraq in 2004. And he was communicating with me. He said, nothing that you see on US TV is the truth of what's going on over here. Nothing.
Yeah.
You know, everybody was talking about oh my God, 87 billion, we're going to rebuild Iraq. And that money, he was all over Iraq because he was part of a special unit. You know, he wasn't out shooting and killing people. He was part of another team. And he said all that money is going into these assets that Bush handed over to his buddies and refurbishing those assets. First they come in and blow it up, then they come in and spend $87 billion to fix it so his buddies own it. That's what was going on.
Really, yes. And imagine the kind of academic researches have been conducted into this based on this total lie. I recall from 2003, 2004, when I started my research, I had my research in film studies, and there was an American guy whose PhD thesis I was reading, and it was about 9/11, the CNN and the American media coverage of 9/11. And imagine the kind of theories and philosophies we had built on the basis of the involvement of Al-Qaeda and the Muslims, and the entire Muslim history, Islamic history has been revisited. What has not happened during this time?
Well, it's like I said on the last one, based on what you have exposed, me, Dan Hanley, and some other good people, there's only one Islamic person on our list of defendants. The rest of Islam is exonerated.
Yeah, and
they had nothing to do with that.
And the terminology has been changing from time to time. First, it used to be, I remember, fundamentalist. That was the fashionable term. Then came the extremist. Then came the terrorist. Then came the Islamists. So you see, these terms have been coming into fashion and falling out of fashion from time to time. And here we are, I think, defending something we had never done.
Yeah, exactly. Somebody, after they watched the part 2 with you and me, they said, what do you actually think of Islamic people? And I said, well, let me put it to you like this. I fired my own brother from providing my insurance, and who handled my insurance of me personally, my home, my property, and even my company was from Iran. And I said, he served me for 22 years, never had one problem. I said, he was a good and honest man.
Carl, I had to face all the odd questions when I was with these European people at that time. I remember a guy asked me in a party, do you think that only Muslims will go to paradise and we are all going to end up in hell? And I don't know about other people, but you certainly will, because you are ruining my evening by asking these stupid questions. But I had to face these questions.
Yeah, well, since now,
something I never did. I had nothing to do with.
Yeah. Well, basically, George Herbert Walker Bush, since Iran-Contra, and being anywhere near my life, since I'm from Arkansas, Mena, Arkansas was part of Iran-Contra. That was the cocaine coming back, flooding back into the U.S. I sometimes jokingly tell people, I said, I know I'm going to heaven because I'm living in hell right now.
Yes. So, well, we have lived through really testing times, haven't we? And now it doesn't seem to be over yet. We have reports as we are talking right now that Israel is going to attack Iran nuclear facilities. I think that is where we should be paying more attention to what is happening in our lives at present. So maybe
I think that 9/11 truth is going to win. That email I sent to Pam Bondi and Senator Johnson and Representative Luna, I copied you on it.
Yeah.
I said 9/11 truth will prevail, but it will not be DC's version.
Will not be DC's version, but we have more to come, Carl. I think we need to talk more about this thing because people need to understand what they have been believing in was not really true. The truth lies somewhere else, and I think it's time to wake up to what really happened.
One of the things I've been asking humanity to do since 9/11, and actually about 5 years prior to that, God gave you a brain, learn to use discernment. Don't buy off on propaganda. Just because they say it in a 10 or 15 or 30-second soundbite does not mean that's the truth. And I know a lot of people, they think just looking at sound bites on their favorite TV station, they're well informed. And you know as well as I know, and Richard Gage knows it, Dan knows it, everybody. You absolutely cannot be informed with little sound bites on an issue like this. You have to double, triple, quadruple down and focus. Otherwise, you don't have a clue what's going on.
Thank you so much, Carl, for your contribution. It's not just to the Muslim world that has suffered because of all this propaganda and this narrative, but everybody, the good American people, I really appreciate. I've met such wonderful people from everywhere, not just the American people or Pakistani or European. There are wonderful people everywhere, and they have fallen victim.
One of the strongest tenets in Christianity is that killing children and innocent women is an unpardonable sin. And I've said for many years, any nation that would do what the United States did on 9/11, just so they could do what they did after that, you have set the hand of God against you and you're going to lose. And I've been watching. They lost Afghanistan, Iraq twice, Libya, Syria, now they're losing Ukraine. That to me is plenty of example that God is very powerful, and He doesn't like lies.
No doubt about it. And all the best to you, Carl. And I really want to take this opportunity of thanking Captain Dan Hanley, who introduced us to each other.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you
for taking the time.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to all the interviews you were doing with those 15 people.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to more, really. Take care
All
of
right.
yourself, Carl. Have a good evening.
You have a good evening too, sir.